What if Africa's ancient stories hadn't been pushed aside by colonialism, propaganda, misunderstanding, and neglect?
No, really. Imagine a world where African mythology, folklore, and culture are seen on the same level and with the same respect as other global religions and stories.
Now, think about the impact of not being represented and the deliberate negative portrayal and oversimplification of an entire continent's complex cultures, tribes, and belief systems. Powerful, right?
Welcome everyone to African Mythology and Religion, a gateway into a world that's often covered in mystery, widespread confusion, and misunderstanding.
That's true. We're Adechi, he's Solomon,
And she's Adra.
And in this series, we'll be talking about all things African mythology,
folklore,
and culture.
Get ready for an interesting and eye-opening journey. In about 10-minute episodes, we will explore why African mythology as a whole is so important, not just by picking some stories, but by tackling tough subjects like the term African mythology itself. We'll discuss the range of different cultures and beliefs and what it means in today's society.
We'll be using African Mythology and Religion, which we'll now call AMR,
because it's a mouthful,
as a key to learning, understanding, and sharing a whole continent's cultures, beliefs, and histories. Solomon, please read the disclaimer.
This series aims to explore African mythology, folklore, and religion with a commitment to respect, accuracy, and cultural sensitivity. We acknowledge that Africa is a vast continent with diverse cultures, spiritual practices, and belief systems. Whilst we strive to provide well-researched content, interpretations and expressions may widely vary amongst different communities and individuals. Some stories and practices we discuss may hold sacred or spiritual significance to specific groups and are shared here for educational and cultural appreciation purposes only. We do not intend to trivialize, misrepresent, or disrespect any beliefs or practices. Listeners and viewers are encouraged to approach this content with an open mind and to engage thoughtfully and respectfully in discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey. What's fascinating is that African mythology is so much more than just tales, right? It's not just bedtime stories.
And although we should do an African bedtime stories series, by the way, that's besides the point.
Exactly. It's a system of beliefs, a reflection of people's worldviews, their values, and even their understanding of the universe and humanity's place in it.
Precisely, and this way of life, this system of beliefs has been shaping African cultures for centuries, offering valuable lessons about right and wrong, how society works, and our connection with nature.
So, it's like AMR is really about understanding different ways of life.
Absolutely.
So sometimes we get comments or even demands to stop using the term African mythology or African culture because it's too broad. Whilst we agree to some extent, sometimes it's okay to use an umbrella term that can cover a whole range, whole area, or shared experiences. We easily use terms like Western philosophy or Eastern medicine, which can be broken down further.
It's funny because I've definitely heard both my dad and your dad say, I'm an African man, or we are African people, so XYZ, and we're sure many of you can confirm that your parents do the same. That suggests that in some way there's a shared understanding of what it means to be African. It's almost like saying, I'm black, right? Or, black people.
Now, the author of The Hero with an African Face admits that using the term African mythology is complex due to the great variety of beliefs and practices across Africa. However, he explains its use by considering mythology on two levels: elemental ideas and local expressions.
Elemental ideas are common themes and ideas shared across different cultures and told through myths. Local expressions are the different cultural versions and understandings of these fundamental ideas.
For example, the world axis is an elemental idea showing a connection between people and gods. One culture might represent it as a spiderweb, whilst another shows it as a central tree. By focusing on these shared elemental ideas whilst admitting diverse local expressions, the author believes that the term African mythology effectively captures the common links amongst the continent's many cultures.
Similarly, the Encyclopedia of African Religion points out the unity of African religion, even though it's different in places. It notes that the continent shares similar beliefs and practices, such as a respect for ancestors, belief in a supreme God, aiming for harmony with the spirits of the world.
This focus on unity fits with the author's reasoning for using the term African mythology. Both views appreciate the diversity of African culture, whilst finding common links that bring them together.
Now, let's talk about the misrepresentation of African mythology. This is where things get tricky because there are so many misconceptions, ideas that have sadly become common and need to be challenged.
Now, outsiders, particularly those with Eurocentric perspectives, have often misunderstood and misrepresented African religions. These misunderstandings come from biases, prejudice, and a lack of understanding of how Africans see the world. We've spoken extensively about the misrepresentation of Eshu in the Yoruba pantheon.
Early observers often called African religions primitive, superstitious, or fetishistic. Such terms show a condescending attitude that sees African spiritual systems as unsophisticated compared to Western religions. This view ignores the complex views of the universe, ethical systems, and sophisticated rituals that are parts of African religions. This term fetishism especially shows a misunderstanding of the African idea that spiritual power is in objects. While outsiders might see this as worshipping the object itself, African religions view these objects as conduits or vessels for spiritual forces.
Saying African mythology is primitive is like saying jazz is just noise.
Exactly. This misconception comes from a long history of bias and attempts to make the complexity of African cultures seem less. So it's not about being behind the times or stuck in the past.
Not at all. It's a different way of understanding the world, a different lens.
Yes, exactly. A different set of lenses through which to view the human experience. Although there is a debate to be made about the place of certain traditions and rituals that are universally morally wrong and their place in modern society. But that itself is a topic for another day.
Western frameworks often classify religions as either monotheistic, one god, or polytheistic, many gods. But this either-or choice doesn't fit African religions. African spiritual traditions often recognize a supreme being, whilst also believing lesser deities, spirits, and ancestors. These hierarchical structures doesn't negate the belief in a single ultimate source of power. Rather, it reflects a complex understanding of the spiritual realm that cannot be easily categorized into Western terms.
Early records of African mythology, especially by male Christian missionaries, often ignored or downplayed the role of goddesses. This bias comes from Christian beliefs that focus on a male supreme being. However, African religions often feature powerful goddess figures who represent the caring and life-giving aspects of the universe. For example, Nana-Baluku.
Ancestor respect in African religions is often misunderstood as simply worship of the dead. However, ancestors are not worshipped in the same way as the supreme being. They are seen as intermediaries who can influence the lives of the living, offering guidance and protection. This belief shows a deep connection between the living and the departed, emphasizing that life and community continues.
The wonders of African philosophy embedded in its myths, proverbs, and rituals have often been disregarded by outsiders. African religions offer profound insights into human nature, ethics, and the relationship between humanity and the universe. Yet colonial-era attitudes frequently dismissed African beliefs as mere superstition, failing to acknowledge the intellectual and spiritual depth underlying these traditions.
These misrepresentations have had a detrimental impact on the understanding and appreciation of African religions and mythology. They have contributed to prejudice, cultural misunderstanding, and the suppression of African religious practices. For instance, derogatory terms were used by outsiders to label traditional African practices, demonstrating a dismissive attitude towards their spiritual systems, which has in turn led to the interesting relationship between post-colonial Africans and their diaspora against traditional cultures.
Christian missionaries often attempted to eradicate African religious practices, viewing them as devilish and incompatible with Christianity. This led to the destruction of sacred objects, disruption of traditional ceremonies, and the forced conversion of many Africans.
It's crucial to approach African religions with respect, open-mindedness, and a willingness to learn their unique perspectives and insights. By doing so, we can begin to appreciate the depth, complexity, and the wisdom embedded in these ancient traditions.
And that's all for today, but we leave you with this. In essence, to understand African mythology and religion, one must appreciate its complex diversity and the underlying themes that unite various cultures across the continent.
And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in this series.
So we hope you'll join us on this journey.
Until next time, stay curious and open-minded.
And thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more about African mythology, folklore, and religion,
then make sure you like, subscribe, and join our growing Patreon community, and follow us on whichever platform suits you best.